Thank you all for coming tonight. We're going to go ahead and get started. The Otis writing that's playing in the background will go away, I promise. I just want to welcome you all here, remind you of the ground rules, and we'll get started from there.
The rules are no smoking in this room, please. Remain respectfully seated for the duration of Don's reading. It's not a rule, but there are books for sale. Don Bogen's books, so buy those. Strongly recommended. And what's the last?
Have a good time.
Oh yeah, cell phones. Turn them off. Not on vibrate. We can hear that. And floss. That's important.
Flossing, buy a book, all the above. To give our reader an introduction, we have Ron Sluicy, so let's welcome Ron to the stage.
Hey everybody.
Hey Ron.
Thought y'all weren't going to talk back there for a second.
Hey Ron.
Hello. I will say hello to each and every one of you, starting over here. Hello, Billy. I didn't mean to leave you hanging, man. Don Bogen is a professor of English and comparative literature at the University of Cincinnati and editor of the Cincinnati Review. Two-time Fulbright senior lecturer and distinguished scholar, first in Spain and then in Ireland, Don has published criticism, translations, and well over 100 poems, including a body of translations by the Spanish poet Julio Martinez Mesanza. He has 4 books of poems. The first 4, is that right? 4 books of poems. The first from Wesleyan University Press in 1986, after the Splendid Display, and his most recent, titled An Algebra, with the University of Chicago Press in 2009. In his first book, After the Splendid Display, Bogen's efficient syntax moves us swiftly across the globe, from the Raja's parade grounds in India to a narrow ledge in the 15th century Sichuan province, from the sun squinting through a drift of frangipani in Bob Marley's Jamaica, through a German market where Johannes Brahms brought Schubert's Calf, to a balcony in Pasadena, California, where her man-sized pet gorilla got loose and romped among the bungalows a scandalous week. In his first book, the speaker's identity inhabits different moments in time, whereas in his most recent book, in Algebra, different moments in time seem to inhabit a speaker's identity, where the green-blue of ocean, the white-blue of sky, fixes itself as memory's backdrop, then dissipates as quickly into broken images of Midwestern industrial decay, as in his poem Edge. Bogen writes, "The edge is something you can't see across. Burnt out refineries on the rim of a winter city, train yards, coal piles, empty prefab warehouses, no people, but a clutter of abandonment against a straight blank sky." I mentioned these then and now distinctions because it's not often you'll find a poet willing to bridge the ideological divide in American poetry. Call it difficult versus accessible, elliptical versus narrative, or whatever you like. What Don Bogen shows us is that the best poems of either school have more in common than not. That is, that language and image trump form and politics. That, as in the field of algebra, division is simply a vehicle for balance. That, as 21st century poets and readers, in terms of ideology, in terms of identity, in terms of culture, our responsibility may well be defined as the bringing together of broken parts. Ladies and gentlemen, Don Bogen.
very much for that amazing introduction. Very thoughtful and generous. I want to thank Jimmy and Aaron for inviting me, and all of you for coming. Can you hear okay with this?
Bring the mic in.
A little bit closer. Like this? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think this will work. I thought I'd read mostly from the new book, an Algebra, but I'll also read. I'll start with an older poem, and then I'll work some newer poems. We'll go back and forth, but mostly from the most recent book. But I want to start actually with a poem. I want to start by making the book right side up, from my previous book, Luster. And I want to read this partly because Jimmy was very kind to me and gave me a wonderful suggestion that made a huge difference in this poem. A lot of the poems in Luster are studies of things, inanimate objects, and then also living creatures. And this is the opening poem. It's a study of racehorses. It's called Thoroughbreds. Blood flares from the nostrils. The lungs, the enormous watermelon bellows, are lined with it. Legs, conduits. Heart stalks that throb with each pulse, each leap into air and two beat thump back on earth. Their genes are a careful proposition. They carry their sires like totems in their names. Their blood is as stylized as a strut. Veins push out a nest of tubes to tunnel the meat, branch like ivy stems beneath the drawn skin. Nothing in nature reflects their taut poise. In the boxes, in the small rings with their necks enclasped by wreaths, they skitter, coltish, annoyed. On the track, they glide. Fluidity comes with their lineage. Training sharpens the point. In the dust and rumble of the furious brief loop, their purpose may seem blurred. The curt whip speaks to them. Their flanks are an argument with friction, the structure of their haunches, an investment. Robed in shining blankets, they wait like fabulous emissaries from another world. The heart lifts with their promise. Windows slam at their start. And it's kind of something I discovered considerably later is that the opening poem of this new book in Algebra has something in common. I didn't realize it. I live in the city of Cincinnati. University of Cincinnati is very much an urban university, but it's a kind of neighborhoody sort of place, so there are various neighborhoods you could pass through fairly quickly, some of them industrial, some of them poor, some of them middle class. Nowhere near where I live is rich, but all different kinds of neighborhoods, and that kind of fascinates me. This is a poem starting in algebra that's about one of my more benign addictions. It's called Run. Wanted solitude, feared it. Wanted to run, always somewhere new. Blank streets of the poor blocks, front yards with chain link fence, hospital buildings sealed, monumental. Wanted no faces in the windows, no visitors coming with roses. At places to turn back, kept going. Wanted the loop larger, taking more in. Small abandoned factories that made boxes, candy, soap, soot-fuzzed louvers, glass underfoot. Wanted the lungs to tighten, 3, then 2 steps to a breath. Wanted solitude, kept turning off the big streets. Found loose dogs growling in driveways, car parts on porches, sidewalks swallowed in weeds. Gravel, wanted the slide of gravel at sudden dead ends, having to turn back uphill. Wanted to slow but would not stop, wanted to come back some different way. Yellow lamp glow of other lives, old parking lots, the closed-off stories of cars dreamed up over and over. Wanted nothing known, all to be imagined. Glint of winter sunlight off windows, late streets empty, echoes muffled on brick. Feared solitude, but wanted the loop larger, wanted everything breath could hold. I want to say a little bit about this strange book with the strange title. For one thing, is I assume I'm reading to folks who are as mathematically challenged as I am. I didn't get much past Algebra 2, or it's not at all a mathematical book in that sense. But it is based on the concept of balance, and it has to do with partly with the title has to do with etymology, with the origins of the word. It's one of the few words in English, as you may know, that it has an Arabic origin. And it means, as was it Ron, the introducer, was kind enough to mention, it means the bringing together of broken parts. And I was surprised just recently, I ran into somebody who's an Egyptian, and she said that that in Egyptian Arabic, the word is still used for reconstructive surgery when bones are broken and they're put back together. And so the book is very much a book about balance, and it has two parts. It is made up of 4 sequences on one part, 4 sequences on the other, 16 individual poems. The parts are framed in certain ways, and then there's 12 poems that are in 2 groups of 6, very symmetrical in certain ways. But the heart of the book is a series of sequences, and some of these sequences actually repeat. There are lines that repeat, and there are also fragmentary units that repeat. So if you hear something twice, you should assume it's intentional. Although it's perfectly possible that I just, repeated myself without even realizing it. But some of the lines are lifted for different purposes. These small units in the sequences were all written independently, and they jump around quite a bit in relation to pronoun, time, focus, etc. But at least I hope that they're held together in the sequence by some overall theme. I think they speak to each other. I once had somebody, when I was working on this in manuscript, who said that they reminded her of the way, like a mobile that turns in the wind, one thing might reflect on another, but then it might change. And I felt very good about that, if indeed it does work that way. So I'll read one of the sequences, and I'll pause briefly between the sections. This one is called a language. It's what you might call about a long-term relationship. That is a marriage. It has 7 sections, and I'll just pause briefly between them. A language. 30 years swept open. Milkweed transfigures the field. How she changed him, he, her, a bird cry defining the territory. Possession of the past, of place, those hills, that coast, of the nest. She marks him, he, her, seizing distances. This music of scenes we shuttle between us, ever more interwoven as measures blur over time. A walk, yes, then a meal, rush and slow of ocean through drawn shades somewhere when notes held, grouped, changed, repeated, overflowing the score. Loops and swirls I know from messages on the phone table, page after page of them, now your hand is ink. The story grows, facts, dates, events. I don't need the news, but a sigh, breathing hieroglyphs. My fingers reading the scroll of your back. Voice in the mind, I want your wet mouth, not this paper that rattles in the wind. Eyes, too, undress, that pale look they take on with your glasses off. A thin blue, fragile, almost violet in the moon shell. Pink lip at the rim, softened pupil that can't read my too close face. Study me now. Focus the dark. Eyes, when my tongue speaks, you are slits. A call of flesh, a lesson learned to relearn. What are you saying each moment I need to hear again? Our hands listen, mouths pushed open as the point drives home. Your hair, shades of wheat at first, of oak, now more soft ash, each night we burn. My forest, my playground, my nest, delirious waterfall, years swirl in my hands, moonlight flooding a darkened room. Metaphors. She is damp earth, and I the plow, drawn to the source of this old noun, husband, now. To sighs, mere sounds. No, not sounds merely, but a language of shifting touch, where she is limb, bud, fruit, trunk, blossom. I'll read one of the sort of middle-length poems in the book. It comes right after this other one, and at kind of the end of the first section of the book. This is based on an experience from a long time ago. The first sabbatical I had, and we went as a young family to Cambridge, England. And we lived in a little village, one of these kind of row houses, basically 19th century kind of thing with sort of 2 rooms downstairs, 2 rooms upstairs, and a bathroom tucked down the back. And it was a very, it wasn't in the center of Cambridge, it was in a little tiny village outside it, a very old-fashioned village. They had, delivery trucks, like a vegetable van would come once a week, and a fish and chips van would come. Or there was an old lady who lived next to us who was like always first in line for the fish and chips van to come out in front of the street. So it was kind of interesting. It was like living in the past in certain ways. And one of the drawbacks of this little tiny house for the 4 of us, one thing was quite small, our son was a baby and our daughter was just starting school, was that there was no washing, there's no laundry, washing machine. There was a washing machine, but once we figured out that it involved taking big tongs and taking the clothes from the hot water, lifting them up and sticking them into the cold water and spinning this thing around, we realized this is not the way to go. So I used to drive on Wednesdays over to the next village, just a short drive across these little flat East Anglian plains with the hedges and everything in order to do the laundry every Wednesday. I'm making a short story long as usual, but there was a florist shop right next to the laundromat, so that was my kind of Wednesday afternoon. And this is a little poem about that time. It's called Flowers. And brought home flowers then, the glad blue iris, bright carnation bouncing on top of the laundry basket in a white car on thin roads, passing hedges and plowed fields in the rain. And brought them flowers, the wife pleased, arranging, the schoolgirl's glee when she came home, the baby reaching up toward them as he would toward the rising of the sun. East wind over the moss wall and garden, sky and shadows streaming by the window, in the gray row house, 2 up, 2 down, the little square of family then, a frame around the table at dusk. And brought home this gesture with the clean wash, a curve of color marking Wednesdays. Each week, the fish man, vegetable man, a new word in the schoolgirls' books, the baby's eyes and hands. And drove home each week through stone villages, Girton, Histon, the names blurring, smokes from allotment gardens on the wind then, berries in wet hedgerows, red as any blood. I'm going to read a couple of the very short poems in the book. These are 7-8 lines long, and they take their first line from last lines in some of the individual sections. Don't ask how I get into this involuted system, but it generated a lot of interesting work for me. I think what I'll read is two that go back a bit further in time to my childhood in Wisconsin. The first refers to something I guess is, well, I guess it's not completely disappearing, but when I was a kid, I was very, very interested in board games. Not just, things like Monopoly, but anything that had pieces and boards, and especially interested in these kind of historical games. And that's the first of the 2 poems. And the second one I'll read, and I won't pause between them. It's called Give It Back. And that refers to, my father was a ham radio operator, and in our little house in Wisconsin, he had what they call a ham shack, a place to run his radios and put things together under the eaves of the attic, because it was an unfinished attic. And I remember going up there as a kid. And both these poems, I think, in a way, are about specific things, but they're also somewhat about memory in general. And I'll read them. They're quite short. I'll just read one right after the other. Slash. The myriads slash and burn. Where are my armies of die-cut cardboard? Map grids, battle charts, dice in the felt-lined cup. Gettysburg and Normandy, worlds at 13 I could half control. History was my door closed, playing both sides. Boxes that engulfed me stumble in the landfill. Soaked and rotting, the worms eating through. Each small thing I make now holds its edge, as if to cut off time. Give it back. Give it back. I made it all up. That alcove where surplus glowed under dust, unfinished, an attic space with nails poking down, khaki of sheet metal, orange flickering in tubes, ephemeral as the smells, which were plywood, solder, and Kent's. Color words, smell words, I put them in a book. Everything there is still missing. 2 lies of remembrance. It was always winter. Things could speak. And as long as I'm in winter, it is a great delight to be in this part of the country, coming from southern Ohio. I actually was worried about being able to drive to the airport with snow. And where I grew up in Wisconsin, there was big snow, which I remember as a kid. And I remember fondly as a kid because I wasn't driving, and it was easier to shovel snow then. But one of the main things I remember is that we lived very close to a park, and they would flood a big section of the park, maybe about the size of a football field. They'd start putting water down around Thanksgiving, and it would freeze, and in that part of the country, I think even still today, it just stays below freezing from, I don't know, end of November to April or something, and then it turned into a skating rink. And I was a little kid, but I used to look longingly at the teenagers skating arm in arm, and the music they listen to, etc. So this is kind of a poem about that time period, and kind of thinking about that generation, the kind of half generation older than me, kind of pre-boomers, if you want to call them, the first folks who encountered that culture, I guess you could say. It's a newer poem, and not in Hope it doesn't make people feel too cold. It's kind of cool in here. Probably should read warmer poems, but I'm set on this one. It's called The Ice Rink. They dazzle me still, those teenagers of the 50s, slow skating arm in arm, under the highlights that made the rest of the park look darker. The speakers on the wired poles sing to them. They are in love with the wordless ahs and oohs, the earnest falsetto, the bassman's pledge over the bridge. Their blade strokes slight and silent, their feet barely move. Scarves dangle from their shoulders. There are pom-poms above her ears. Their unimaginable secrets make white puffs near their faces, brief as the glances when their eyes meet. They circle the rink slowly as the record circles its spindle, and glide for a while still after it's over. At home they mope, slumped, awkward, half rebellious, retreating to their narrow rooms and radios. They hear Little Richard, or Pat Boone covering Little Richard on WTMJ, and take heart in the nonsense shouts, the drum set and yipping sax. Surely something will happen to them. This life in the bland debris of mid-century can't last. Cars, graduation, a first job at Kresge's or the canning plant, maybe college, or 18 months in Okinawa by a lonely sea. There will be room in the latest expansions when he gets back. Someone is planning a tract house for them on the edge of town. Schools multiply. The two-tone sedans they will want are already growing fins. But for now, they have letter sweaters and pink change purses, and the hits keep coming. Winters are long here. The rink stays open from Thanksgiving through Easter. Its scratched, glassy circle is a slow clock. Night after night, they flicker between boredom and exquisite desire. Everyone says they're the start of something, but they aren't enough. They have no brothers or sisters, or have forgotten them. He enters into the project of his jalopy, dreaming of summer. There will be drives to the little towns nearby, evenings along the lake. They know they can get out of it all, but why would they want to? Under her wool coat, she is wearing a small pin shaped like a wood chip with his name on it. They will cling to each other because the song is ending and there are still good jobs in the factory. They will marry because love, oh love, swept them into the dark. I think I'll read a different sequence now from back to an algebra. This is the one that's about, I guess it's about art, different kinds of art and loss. It starts in a kind of weird, one of the few experiences in my life, I'm not at all superstitious, but one of the few times in my life when I actually thought I felt a ghost. I guess that's what the poem says. I guess I believe that in some ways. This is at an artist colony that's fairly famous for these ghosts around it. And what's a very awkward situation, it was at the dining table, there was this older woman, a sculptor there, a wonderful artist, talking to a younger woman about the ghosts in this place. And she said to this younger woman, well, you're in so-and-so's cottage, And I stayed there once when I was here, some years ago, and the ghost came, and it was okay, the ghost was very sad, and we just hung out a bit, and I'm sitting there like, and this younger artist is kind of troubled, and that night, the giant plate glass window in that particular building broke, and the young woman took off and never came back. That's the opening. So the opening starts in there, and then the sections have to do with different kinds of art and the relation to time. The only other thing that's maybe needs a little explanation is the title, Bagatelles. Basically means it's used for occasional musical pieces, so like a trifle, a small thing. But I'm also thinking a little bit, if you know them, the wonderful Weber and Bagatelles, they're very, very short, but they're not trifles. They're very, very deep and powerful pieces of music.